We are live.
Okay, thank you, Kim. And you said you sent the link out again to everybody?
I did.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Evans, would you please call the roll?
Yes, I will. Dr. Blanton?
Present.
Dr. Bullock?
Here.
Dr. Dempsey?
Present.
Dr. Fleming?
Present.
Miss Edwards?
Morning.
Dr. Graham?
Present.
Dr. Houston? Dr. Locklear?
Here.
Dr. Marr?
Present.
Dr. Elliott?
I'm here.
Dr. Penfield? Superintendent Truitt?
Here.
Ms. Carper? Dr. Holland?
Here.
Dr. Weddington?
Present.
Dr. Griffin?
Here. Present.
Mr. Smith?
Present.
And Mr. Patton. We have quorum.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. I will call the meeting to order. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome commission members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, and online listeners to the February 16th, 2023 monthly meeting of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. The Standards Commission develops and recommends to the State Board of Education rules related to all aspects of educator preparation, licensure, continuing education, and professional standards of North Carolina educators. I am Van Dempsey, Chair of the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission, and I call this meeting to order. Our agenda and materials are available online through the DPI website, www.ncpublicschools.org, on the SBE meetings link. The meeting is also audio streamed through a link located at the bottom of the e-board agenda. I will now read the ethics statement that is required of us. Commission members are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this commission. Does any member of the commission know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Commission members, you have had an opportunity to review the proposed agenda for today's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve this agenda for the February 16th, 2023 meeting?
I move approval, Dr. Dempsey. Anthony Grant.
Bonnie second.
Thank you both. We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes from our previous commission meeting on January 12th, 2023 have been prepared and made available to you. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes?
I think Dr. Holland has a question or a comment.
Okay, Dr. Holland.
My apologies, Dr. Dempsey and everyone. Really quick question, because I'm not familiar with the perceived conflict of interest necessarily where this might lie, and I don't know if we want to take this conversation offline, but I know that we're going to be talking briefly about the teacher attrition report today. And I have some concerns about some of the data that's presented there, and I have a relationship and an actual employment relationship with one of the cultural exchange companies that does some of the work around the international faculty. I'd like to get those questions answered. I'm happy to abstain from voting if there's an expectation that we vote to accept or do anything around that. But is that a conflict of interest, and should I handle that separately?
Ms. Schaefer, we do not have any voting action on that. There may be discussion or questions. Is that present a problem? Kim, because we have a few minutes before we get there, and Dr. Holling, can we send that question to Ms. Schaefer in the chat, and when hopefully we'll get a response. And then I do not, from my point of view, I don't perceive that as a conflict of interest because you can't influence anything through a vote. But
right, there's no vote for that item today.
Yeah.
That is solely a review, and also I sent the link in the PowerPoint to members prior to the meeting, and so that's how it's being referenced today, not as an actual presentation.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Holland. I believe we can proceed.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. The minutes. Dr. Evans lost track. Did we approve the minutes?
Not yet.
Okay. The minutes from the previous commission meeting on January 12th, 2023 have been prepared and made available to you. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved.
Catherine.
I think we had a motion from Dr. Weddington and a second from Dr. Truitt. Unless there are any questions, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? The minutes are approved. Now, Doctors Andrew Seiberg, Tom Tomlin, and Kim Evans will present the NC, DPI, and State Board updates. Dr. Evans.
Hi there. I will be presenting the updates from the State Board this month for LICN 001 for the numerous policy amendments that was unanimously passed by the State Board. So that was approved, and that is now in LICN 001 on the State Board website under policies. And then we had two other items for discussion, and that was State of the Teaching Profession report and the EPP performance reporting, and both of those were sent to all members. The PowerPoints were sent, and then the link to the State Board presentation that Dr. Tomberlin did, the State of the Teaching Profession, and Dr. Seiberg presented the EPP performance reporting. And feel free to use that link and those PowerPoints to review those materials. The link will start immediately at the State of the Teaching Profession presentation. So you don't have to search for it. But for this month, since we have other things on the agenda, we have decided to just send it through email this time around. So if you have any follow-up questions, you can feel free to email myself or Dr. Dempsey or both of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Any questions? Any other updates, Dr. Evans?
No, that is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Lee O'Neill will present policy amendments to CTED 004, Career and Technical Education Licensure Manual updates. Ms. O'Neill.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay, Dr. Dempsey?
Yes.
Good morning, Dr. Dempsey, Superintendent Truitt, members of the commission, and DPI staff. I'm Lee O'Neill, Section Chief for CTE Regional Services. Also on the call is Suzanne Lujan. She's our CTE Regional Coordinator in the Sandhills region, and she has been instrumental in this work as well. We are here today to request your support for revisions to CTED 004. This policy governs new teachers who meet the eligibility requirements and choose an initial provisional CTE restricted license. These initial licenses are based on related work experience, related degrees, and in many cases, industry credentials. It also governs the adding of CTE teaching and support services areas to existing licenses. Keep in mind that CTE teachers are still recruited from teacher education programs, and some also pursue residency license in CTE areas. But for these revisions, I want you to know that we have had feedback over the last couple of years from our CTE directors, HR directors, DPI licensure staff, and CTE staff, all throughout the past couple of years that this policy has been out. In the materials, you have a summary of changes, the strike-through version of the policy and procedures manual, which is attached to CTED 004, and this slide deck. So I'll quickly kind of go through the updates that we are requesting. In section 1, we actually provide the definitions for the policy. Here we define what the 18 semester hours is required. So right now we have that as university and community college can provide that coursework, but we're also adding EPPs as an option because, of course, they're required or allowed for completing the requirements of pedagogy for residency. And so we have some EPPs that are not university or community college. So we want to give them that option as well. In section, there are no changes to section 2. So on into section 3 is where you find the individual license areas that we offer. It includes examples of related degrees, related work experience, required degree levels, required years of work experience, and required credentials or special courses or tests that are required for an individual license. So across the board in all license areas, to improve our ability to recruit teachers from other educational institutions, such as a post-secondary school, a professional trade school, as well as out-of-state candidates, we want to be able to add previous teaching experience in the content area to all CTE license areas as an additional example of related work experience. We're also removing the requirement that the years of experience be within a certain time frame on all CTE license areas. This will give more flexibility to the PSUs, giving them the opportunity to evaluate candidates that may not have qualified previously due to staying out of the workforce to care for children or family members. We've certainly seen some COVID impacts where folks are not qualifying with that type limit to the years of experience, and they may have worked in other areas lately but still have great experience to bring to the table. So with each individual license area, I'll kind of quickly go through those changes for you. For our 760 business license, we're updating related degrees and work experience and adding an associate degree option as a minimum degree with 4 years of related work experience. Several family and consumer science licenses that we offer. In these, we're adding, updating the related degrees and related work experience. We like to do that from time to time because, the field changes. We like to keep up with what's current in the field. On several of these, we are also adding associate degree as a minimum degree level option with 4 years of related work experience. In our health science licenses, on the 720 RN license, we're updating clarifying language because we need to help the field qualify candidates who can be approved by the North Carolina Board of Nursing to offer the Nursing Fundamentals course. The North Carolina Board of Nursing is the authorized curriculum provider for this course, and our teachers have to meet their requirements. So we're just adding some language to help the field understand how they will qualify. We're also adding an associate degree option for the biotechnology license. For the marketing license, again, some related degree and related work experience updates, adding that associate degree with 4 years as a minimum degree option. We also had the praxis in the wrong column. It is not required prior to teaching. They can get it during the initial licensing period. So we're just moving that over into the correct column. Getting to our trade and industrial area licenses, we're adding related degrees to the collision repair license, moving the credential column over to something they can do during that initial licensing period, and also letting that teacher get that within the first 6 months of hire. We've worked with our curriculum provider on that to help us improve our ability to recruit in this area. Also updating the credentials for the drafting license and the work experience for the welding license. Finishing out our trade and industrial licenses, we are updating the manufacturing license work experience examples and updating 2 credentials in this license area to align with industry and curriculum standards. Same thing with the digital media credential options, just improving that alignment to industry and curriculum standards, and adding another option, credential option for the public safety license. We also had an incorrect license number on the limited course option license, so that's a correction. And then lastly, in section 4, this is the part of the policy that provides the governance for adding license areas to existing license. We align that to LICN 001, and we also add an additional option for those CTE license areas that require a credential. We allow the adding of those licenses with that credential because it is significant enough to prove content and skill knowledge. So we've just updated those options there to match the changes in credentials we just went over for Section 3. We also did some clarifying language to the 721, which is the non-RN health science license, just to clarify those options. And corrected, we had another wrong number. So we corrected the license number on the career development facilitator license, which was a new license a couple of years ago. And that concludes my requested revisions. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have for me at this time.
Are there any questions from the Pepsi members? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the policy amendments to CTED 004, Career and Technical Education Licensure Manual, to be sent to the State Board of Education in March 2023? Is there not a motion, or am I not hearing?
So moved. This is Catherine.
Thank you.
Second, this is Scott.
Thank you both. Any further discussion or questions? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you very much. And thank you, Ms. O'Neill, for your presentation and report.
Thank you all for your continued support for CTE.
Thank you. Next, I will share the recommendations for the Pathways pilot from the 4 working groups for discussion and action by the membership. I would like to share a few background and context comments for the point where we are today. As noted in the December Pepsi meeting and subsequent communication to Pepsi, our timeline and development of recommendations are now connected to the calendar for the State Board of Education and the North Carolina General Assembly. Given the calendars thus far for the General Assembly, we have a clearer timeline that helps us in Pepsi understand key dates for developing and forwarding any recommendations. This is in part driven by the legislative calendar related to drafting the state budget and appropriations activity to come from both the General Assembly and the Governor's office. We have 3 critical dates ahead that we need to address. 1, the State Board of Education meets March 1st, and that meeting would need to consider any recommendations for Pepsi, giving the dates that I will reference next. In order for the State Board to consider any recommendations where they and the State Superintendent would engage the General Assembly or Governor's office, those recommendations must be received by the State Board from Pepsi February 17th, hence the move of the meeting to today. The governor's budget would need to include any appropriations related to pilots of the North Carolina Pathways recommendations, and the governor's staff would need related information by March 1st. Finally, the General Assembly will need related information for any appropriations drafting 4 weeks prior to March 29th in order to consider those in initiating the appropriations process. To accomplish this, I asked the work group co-chairs to do the following based on briefs that summarize and synthesize Pepsi's work thus far. Each work group received a brief. These documents are a synthesis of information from the following: the draft model components that Pepsi created during the initial work of our 4 subcommittees from March 21st through November 22nd. The blueprint for action, approved by Pepsi in November of 2022 and accepted by the State Board of Education in December of 2022, and that led to the current 4 work groups for the pilot areas requested by the State Board. And third, the scaffolding notes that were shared at the December 2022 Pepsi meeting. Co-chairs use the work group meetings that have occurred since December and interactions with their groups as vehicles for work group members to provide advice and suggestions to the co-chairs on their drafts. The purpose of the documents are to serve as briefs that synthesize work thus far and that can be forwarded to the state board upon review and consideration by Pepsi. Pepsi will now consider those documents and motion for approval and for potential forwarding to the state board. This process of reviewing and confirming the briefs is a step in an ongoing process. The work in which Pepsi is engaged in our statutory requirement to inform statute and policy related to the Pathways effort will continue. I will now ask the co-chairs for each of the groups to provide an overview of their group's work. We will go through each of the 4 reports and then we will open up for discussion and questions. So we will begin with the Student Impact Measures Work Group.
Good morning, Dr. Dempsey, Superintendent Truitt, and members of the commission. My name is Chris Blanton. I am here to present on behalf of the Student Impact Measures Work Group. My co-chair was Randy Penfield. He is unable to join us today, so I will be taking on the duties of presenting. One of the first things that we did was we immediately, some of the feedback from our work group was that the title Impact Measures didn't really capture the work that we were doing. So we changed the title from Student Impact Measures to Measures of Teaching Effectiveness. There was some discussion about the language there, whether it needed to be teacher effectiveness or teaching effectiveness. We landed on teaching effectiveness, and that change will show up in number 1 and 2. And I'll move through the document as quickly as I can. Number 1, articulation of the purposes of the measures as related to informing teaching effectiveness. For those of you that saw the previous documents that read in the beginning, articulation of the purpose of the measures as related to informing student impact. Again, the title was changed and we changed student impact in number 1 to teaching effectiveness. And then subsection A, the measures provide metrics or evidence for teachers to demonstrate teaching effectiveness. That used to read measures to demonstrate how they are impacting student learning. So again, one of the first things that came out of the work that this group was doing is that the idea of student impact measures really didn't align with what we saw in number 2 and some of the content that was in there. So those changes were made in number 1 and number 2. Moving on down to number 2, one of the big changes that was made is there were 2 subsections, A and B, in the original document. You'll see in front of you now, it's just A. Original document was A, content, and B, pedagogy. And those 2 were almost identical. And so those were combined into 1. And you see that it's content and pedagogy, and it's aligned with the NTAS standards. And so I won't go through all of the Roman numerals there, but one thing that did seem to be important to our work group was Roman numeral 5, the addition there, which we added to this document, completion of a State Board of Education approved EPP. And then Roman numeral 5 was moved down to 6, other tools as designed, which will come later in the process during the pilot and implementation phase if approved. And so again, number 2, really the big thing that happened there was the combining of content and pedagogy into one category. Moving on down to number 3, this is there was a lot of discussion around number 3 and the idea that this is where the real work still needs to occur, and we're probably not at that point yet, but the real work that's going to happen with this later is going to be aligning the measures to the NTAS standards and determining which measures line up with each subsection there and which of those meet which NTAS standards will satisfy those requirements. And so, again, a lot of discussion about that. I think there's a good bit of work left to be done in this. And one of our work group members even made the comment that how well this happens during the implementation phase could ultimately determine whether or not this is a success or failure. One thing that we did, one adjustment that we made from the original document is that under E, License 4, it originally said that all 10 standards would be at the mastery level. That change was made to, you see it reflected on there, all 10 standards would be at the proficient level with selected standards at the mastery level. And again, there's work left to be done there to determine which standards, excuse me, at the would need to be at the mastery level. And if the commission would need to designate which standards, or if that would kind of be open. And then the last section, number 4, articulation of basic expectations to establish validity and reliability tools. C was added. That was not in the original document. And there was a strong feeling that any measures that are being used need to be valid and reliable prior to being used to determine any compensation for teachers in the field. And on down to the addendum, which you will now see in front of you. There are 3 bullet points on the addendum. We talked a lot about bullet point 1 and the idea that all measures would be of equal importance, and that's going to be difficult to achieve, we think. It's a little bit ambiguous, but there is some merit to it, so we left it in the addendum. Bullet point 2, we feel like we could gather data to support whether or not different assessment pathways reflect equivalent levels of teaching effectiveness. And then 3, really the big thing that we did there from our original working document was we changed the language to could. Multiple measures could be used to meet all in-task standards. Thank you for your time. And I think that I heard Dempsey say that we were going to take questions maybe after all had presented. I'm not sure if that's the way we're doing this or if I need to open it up for questions now. Chair Dempsey, I will follow your lead on that.
We'll go through all, thank you. We'll go through all 4 of the reports and then we'll come back for the questions. Thank you for the report. The next, new entry pathways work group.
Good morning, everyone. So this is Marcy. Madison and I did not discuss who was going to be handling this. So I'm going to jump in. Madison, stop me, correct me, do whatever you need to do. I'm sorry?
I was just saying that sounds good. Like we unmuted at the same time. So.
Perfect. So our group met, we met collectively as whole groups for each of our meetings. And really delved into focusing on certain parts of this versus others. We felt like the actual articulation of the entry points specifically for each of the levels had been outlined well. And then the salary compensation piece, we didn't really dive into that because, like the earlier group, there was work that was done before to establish the minimum salary schedules and build a salary schedule that we felt comfortable with earlier going into this work. And knowing that adjustments are going to be made going forward, we didn't want to really spend a whole lot of time on that. But in our work, you will see that no real significant changes to anything. We did update under number 2, credentials of a person entering at each point for the apprentice license. We edited that to be associate's degree or higher towards the baccalaureate, because there may be individuals who already have a bachelor's degree who come in and would work or who would start at the apprentice level. And we wanted that flexibility to be there. So there may be someone with a baccalaureate degree who wouldn't necessarily start at license 1. So that was one recommendation and edit that we've made. Made some other minor revisions to structure to make sure that it's clear that some of the, particularly when you're looking at progression and evidence of practice to maintain the license and the transition from one to the other, are subsets of the higher overarching thoughts there. Specifically when you get down into under number 3, under F, using tools there. Originally, each of those were listed as one comprehensive list, but for Roman numeral I, we've got using the following tools, provide evidence of mastery of standards. We've specifically identified that it's seeding growth, EVOS 3 out of 5 if available, and tools designed to measure impact for student learning are actually subsets of that. So that really was just structural in the way that the data or this information is being presented. Allison, what else have I missed? Under 4, we really want to reference the work of the other 2 groups. We didn't spend a lot of time there on the supports because we knew that other groups were going to be focused on those areas. For the addendum, again, we referenced the change to the associate's degree or higher. There's a lot of question around the salary schedules and compensation and the restoration of master's pay. So we respectfully and politely had to agree to disagree on some of the philosophy and even some of what is presented as data around those topics, but we did want to at least point out that collectively the earlier group and then building that salary schedule had included restoration of master's pay. Where that lands, we realize is out of our hands at this point, but that is what's recommended from the group. And then transitioning out-of-state teachers was a topic and a question, again, that we feel like the original plan for transitioning out-of-state teachers could be applied to your international faculty teachers or international candidates in general, whether they come through on a cultural exchange program like we have operating. There are 3 companies in North Carolina. Or if it's an international teacher who comes here with credentials who actually becomes a resident and is applying for a license based on international credentials. So we feel like that could be included in that work, in what's already been outlined for transitioning of out-of-state teachers. And that is all that I have. Madison, feel free to add whatever I've missed.
I think you covered it pretty well.
Thank you both for that report. Our third report, new professional learning tools and structures.
Sorry, I was stuck on mute. This is Hank Weddington. Thanks for giving us a chance to talk about this a little bit. And Dr. Locklear will jump in if I miss anything along the way. I'm not going to read through, but I'm going to point out some places where we had some questions and some good discussion throughout this. Again, this particular work group was looking at the kind of professional development for in-service teachers, but also a list of tools that would help people move through the licensure process and the new pathway. If you move down to letter C under number 1, methods to earn CEUs. We had some discussion about what the language here was actually saying, conversion of CEU away from time to competency. We understand that to be that we don't want this to be about seat time, that you could just sit in front or turn your computer on with a professional development module running and make enough time and end it without any kind of competency attached to it. However, we want to make sure that the language is clear enough that we don't want a credit by exam kind of model for this, and that there may be some non-competency based professional development that's important. And I'll point this out in some other places as well, but we talked about things like teacher well-being, self-care, community engagement, things that might not be easily competency-based, but might make a real impact in the classroom in indirect ways. So just putting that out there for consideration. Under C3, still under number 1, there was coursework was included in there without the line from an approved EPP. We added the approved EPP. Thank you, Kim, for highlighting that, to ensure that we weren't accepting coursework from non-accredited or approved programs there. So that is all on number 1 in terms of our questions around that. If you go to number 2, we added a line here as well. In the beginning, it was articulation of a menu of potential tools to provide flexible access. We included a menu of potential tools that would be vetted through a state approval process. We wanted to be clear throughout this document that any new tools that come onto the scene would need to be vetted and approved by whatever process we determined during this pilot or beyond. And we also wanted to ensure that these tools would have a sunset date for renewal so that they remained relevant and effective for teachers based on what was happening in education in our profession at that particular moment in time. Under G on number 2, we added other. This is new as well. And that was basically to maintain consistency with item number 1, where we listed other. Again, one of the things that we were trying to do was not to let ourselves get hemmed in legislation to a certain group of tools, but to leave it open and broad so that we could explore as many things as possible during this pilot. Kim, if you'll move up to number 3. We didn't have any new recommendations under number 3. We felt that the language here was where it needed to be. Under number 4, you'll see we added a line here. Initially, it said evaluate in the pilot process whether competency-based learning has a positive effect. We added professional learning tools, including competency-based learning. Again, understanding the fact that we do want this to be connected to a competency model, but that there may be professional learning that perhaps doesn't fit that mold, but is equally important to a teacher's growth, especially at some of those advanced levels as you move into leadership positions. And then number 5, we added the word renewal, process of approval and renewal. Again, hoping that any tools that we look at and any processes that we use during this pilot, any decisions made would have to come up for renewal over time to ensure that, what we were doing was always kept relevant, fresh, and benefited the teachers and public school students of our state. The very last thing on letter B there, we added a line here as well. So as part of the pilot process, the state may collect examples of professional learning opportunities that lead to CEUs being awarded. We would also like during this time data from PSUs regarding the time and resources that is required for developing their own learning tools and evaluating teacher competencies. I think one of the things we need to see is if we're asking our adult leaders and our administrators to do a lot of this work, how much time is it taking? What kind of release is necessary for it? What kind of extra funding may be necessary for it? So we would like that data collected as well. Now we did have an addendum item that I would like to just throw out there. Kim, if you could move down to the addendum. Couple of them actually. The first bullet there, that I've already talked about, that we wanted to make sure that there was an approval process for any new tool that came onto the scene and that could be developed during the pilot. And then for level 4 and above teachers, it seemed to us, we point to the in-task progression of standards throughout our documents, and we're all comfortable with those standards up to a point. The question became, once you get to expert teacher level and above, the progression stops. So we would need to either extend those in-task standards and that progression to make it fit with more experienced teachers, or perhaps look at some other standards that we could align and benchmark to for the teachers at those levels. The last thing, and I promise I'll be quiet after this, is that this was kind of outside of our domain, but when we began talking about all this, we saw the advanced teacher role especially the advanced teacher role, adult leadership being really an important part of the process for developing professional learning tools, identifying, seeing if they were valid and reliable measures, and actually doing some of the work of evaluating teachers within their building. So we added some recommendations of what we thought that role should be engaged in. And you can see those in the first bullet and the sub bullets under it. We also said that, you know, if this role is going to have some of these particular duties, there has to be sustained state funding for an adequate number of advanced teachers in each PSU and the schools within. And it was real important to our group that we weren't just taking a current teacher, pulling them out of the classroom to do this work and not replacing that teacher position with another teacher within the school. And creating another burden. So the group said the number of advanced teachers could be based upon an equation. And I know some of this talk happened in other subgroups before, but we just suggested ADM, number of teachers and apprentice through license level 3 who would need mentoring, the socioeconomic need of the PSU, and any other school capacity measures for equitable distribution of funding. We also are suggesting that anybody who's doing this work as an adult leader should go through effective evaluation technique training, such as the Gates Foundation's measures of effective teaching. And I'll leave it at that. Dr. Locklear, is there anything else we need to add?
No, you covered it well, Hank. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both. Our fourth group, advanced teaching and leader roles.
Yes, good morning. This is Bill Griffin. Can everybody hear me? I'm working remotely this morning.
Yes.
Great, wonderful. I'll also be Scott Elliott. Scott Elliott is here with me. And Scott, if you would please just chime in upon our work as we go through this process. To begin with, number one, identification of the roles that were to be piloted, talking about the adult leadership program in the classroom of excellence. It became certainly apparent here in our group that the full release part, that we wanted to make sure that that definition also reflected the fact that those individuals would be working inside those classrooms with students and other colleagues, as well as they helped guide them in that process. Classroom excellence, again, that they would be taking on probably additional students within that role, and to making sure that those definitions adhered to what was being expected of those roles there. Number two, the definitions and responsibilities of those roles, each of the adult learner and the classroom excellence. We felt like on Roman number 2, 3, and 4, that the amount of hours that were being addressed there, we added the word recommended. We felt like it was too specific to what was being demanded of those teachers, and they needed some flexibility as they began part of that process of devoting that time to support those teachers within that classroom setting, not so specific to 5 hours, 2 hours, and 1 hour, but that be a good representation of a model in which to adhere to. Down to 3, the expectations and credentials to attain, hold, and maintain those licenses appropriate. A lot of conversation here. We felt, as of what I've heard in some of the other committees at this point, we weren't aware of the work that was going on in the committees prior to us and those license level 4s. So we did leave a lot of this wording as is, but there was certainly a lot of conversation within our group on what the expectations prior to the advanced teacher role in those licensures. There was also a lot of work and conversation about credentialing those individuals that do hold the license for, and then what that meant moving forward. And we did want to hear on some of the other work that was happening in the committees prior to ours on those levels. We also had several conversational points about the distinguished performance on the 360 evaluation process and model. we had some questions about that model and what that meant. Some of us weren't very familiar with that model, and we're just wanting to make sure that it did reflect the work that was going on within what was taking place here. I heard just a second ago from Hank talking about evaluation. That topic came up several times within our committee, to the point that we felt the advanced teacher roles were not evaluators, and we wanted to be very, very cautious with that word to make sure that we weren't replacing principal administration, principals and principalship with that evaluative term. So there was a lot of caution used there with that. And 4, supports necessary for the teacher to obtain and hold those licenses. We did hit on that we certainly feel there needs to be district support for these positions. That needs to be funded, and making sure that we aren't putting these individuals as leaders within our schools out on an island, and that we do provide proper leadership and development for them as well. I think compensation, one of the biggest topics that came about for us was that a lot of feedback about these stipends or these additional salaries, the $15,000 and the $5,000, that it would be counting towards retirement. I think that was a very important piece that was reflected with us on multiple occasions. We felt like as a committee that was certainly beneficial to a colleague. We did change the $10,000 for the adult leadership to $15,000 at several districts that had already implemented the advanced teacher roles. They did not feel that was a competitive salary, and that much of those districts already paid more than that $10,000. So we did make that recommendation on that change to $15,000, and then left the $5,000 for the classroom excellence. And then finally, the components of assessment, and looking at those 2 different roles, the different measures on the impacts of those teachers and what they're serving, and then renewal process. Again, a lot of conversation going back to what those license 4 criterion were, and meeting those demands to make sure that we were in line as these teachers look to renew their license, and then making sure that we also assess their leadership appropriately as well. And then finally, 7, recommendation on determining the number of assigned educators in advanced roles. A lot of conversation here. We left it as it was written in the brief. However, listening to Hank that precluded me in the conversation, we did feel there needed to be a very, very defined number of individuals, and how that came about. We had conversations from the performance of teachers to the needs based at each of the different schools. We also talked about the funding, that certainly needs to be there, and the fact that these should be supplemental roles, especially the adult leadership roles that are coming outside of those classrooms, that needs to be supported in lieu of the traditional allocation that we receive. For that to be effective in per se a small school, that would have to be an additional position to be supplemented at that time. And then finally, our working group addendum, that the adult license as a full release teacher, this teacher would include instruction for a certain percentage of the total responsibility, that they would actually be providing instruction, working with students and teachers alike, and then that support, that coaching piece, that we would provide success for those individuals. And then finally, that providing those responsibilities for the AL and the CE licensed positions to streamline, that we gave flexibility to each of the districts, that we didn't define this language so specific that different districts could and had flexibility on their own to make these positions beneficial for their current district. Scott, is there anything that I missed there that you want to refine?
Thank you, Bill. Dr. Griffin did a really great job there. I would only just emphasize some of the parts of the conversation from our work group. And by the way, we had a fantastic work group, and a lot of work is already being done across the state in advanced teaching roles, and we have the benefit of their knowledge and a lot of lessons that we can learn from this. I also appreciated Hank's comments about the additional staffing allotment. That was a consistent and strong consensus among our group, and I'm hearing that from superintendents as well. This will not be a viable or successful implementation without additional positional allotments, not just the supplemental pay. Questions to be explored through the pilot, I think we think include whether or not this actually needs to be a separate license area, or maybe it is an endorsement or something. And again, going back to some of our earlier conversations and my feedback from superintendents, that the more we can help to simplify all of these processes, perhaps the better. Again, the importance of them being separate and additional positions rather than coming out of existing allotments, perhaps in lieu of class size flexibility or something like that. Also, a question to be explored about how these positions are evaluated and the extent to which they are evaluated based on the performance or their impact on the performance of students for whom they are not the teachers of record. And then the feedback from the folks in the field who are working in advanced teacher roles is that these roles will look very different from school to school and district to district, and that we need the greatest flexibility possible to achieve that. So, thank you all.
Thank you both. I also want to echo the thanks to the work groups. Thanks for everybody for the work they've done in a reasonably compressed timeline to get to this point. And thank you to all of the co-chairs for the facilitation of the process so far. Do we have, at this point, I think we can entertain any clarifying questions that people may have about each of the work group summaries prior to considering a motion?
Mr. Chair, this is Catherine Truitt.
Yes.
Can I ask a question of the first work group, please?
Please.
Thank you so much. And I echo Chair Dempsey's sentiments about all of the work that got us to this point today, especially in the last couple of weeks with this compressed timeline. So in section 1, I believe, of the first group, the measures of teaching effectiveness work group. Thanks, Kim. Yes, so number 2, Roman numeral 5. So does, I guess this is a question for that group. Is this indicating that completing an SBE approved EPP should be a measure of teaching effectiveness?
Hey, this is Chris again. I may be the only one in the meeting today from our group, and so I'm going to take a stab at that. Yes, that seemed to be the that was the discussion of the group, and we had a lot of conversation around that. To be honest with you, about adding that, but yeah, I mean, I think that, and there were a number of members from EPPs on that work group, and I should have led with this, but that was a great group of people who did a lot of hard work, and I appreciate their time and effort and energy spent in that. But yes, they felt strongly, and I tend to agree, the completion of an EPP would indicate that the person would have completed some measure of a program that would lead to teaching effectiveness. So yes.
Okay, I can see why there was a lot of discussion about that. And while I agree that with a lot of the initial work that surrounded the level of license that a person should begin their teaching career with, having completed an SBE approved educator prep program, I'm not sure how that is indicative of teaching effectiveness in and of itself.
I think Dr. Truitt, trying to remember from reading meeting minutes, that because this is part of a menu that is related to content and pedagogy, and state board approved educator preparation programs have to meet the NTAS standard expectations on content and pedagogy. That was the reason this one was put in that list, if I'm remembering correctly from previous conversations. It's part of the menu. It's part of the options in the content and pedagogy components because of the relationship to end task.
Thank you.
Dr. Dempsey, would this be in the first renewal or first move from one level to another level, or is this kind of in perpetuity in terms of this using completion of an SPE?
Well, so, and I'll go back to the co-chairs, but it is the recommendation at this point in a pilot.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Chair Dempsey, this is Tom Tomberlin. I have a question, if I may.
Yes.
So this is kind of a logic question with that same issue that I want to make sure I'm understanding this. So if completion of an SBE approved, there's two ways that I could look at this and interpret this. If just assuming that I were trying to implement this in a pilot. One is that if you complete an SBE, if you complete an approved EPP program, that is one way to establish your entry point. And the fact that there are other measures here would seem to indicate to me that you could do that with any of the other measures to the exclusion of number 5. So I want to make sure, is that the right interpretation? That if I pass the EdTPA in praxis, I don't need to engage with an EPP. I can be situated in the licensure section and progress without an EPP? Or the alternative is, since the current system suggests that all licensed educators have to complete an ed prep program, what then is the purpose of 1 through 4 and 6? And I'm not sure, I'm not clear just how one would interpret the inclusion of a EPP there in this set. And maybe that's a question for Mr. Bland.
I will be happy to take a stab at that. And I think that your question is where a lot of the discussion was around. I think EPPs were, the folks that were on the work group from the EPPs were basically saying, this is one way to meet that, and not having that included is a problem. And I think I understood your question. I may need to get you to clarify some of that, but yeah, to answer what I think you asked was, an educator prep program would be one way to enter at a certain license, and I believe we have it at license 1. Kim, is that correct? If the successful completion of an EPP gets you to license 1, and so I think that the work group felt like that if that's not included, then that almost would lead people to believe that that's not a viable option. Is that what you're asking?
I think I'm asking the question a little differently. Is, if it's one option, does that suggest that these other options can be employed to the exclusion of participating in an EPP?
I'll take a chance to answer that. I think, and I'm speaking from the subcommittee work that we did and how I think that informed what's in the brief. The completion of state board approved educator programs in the subcommittee work and in conversations sort of lived in assumptions that everyone understood that if a state board educator approved state board approved educator preparation program was possible, which it is. That's how we do this now. It was not explicit in the language and the text that we're creating. And I think, Chris, one of the reasons this is in here is to make that explicit. That is a route to be able to do this. The second part I remember from the discussions is educator preparation programs are inclusive of other tools that are listed in that list, and their connection to InTask is consistent across all of the tools. EPPs could, for example, use micro-credentials as part of a path that someone in a license at an entry point could use in completion of the clearing of the license. But the educator preparation programs as they currently exist do include things like EdTPA, Praxis.
You said that well. That summarizes a lot of the discussion that was had. Correct.
Yes.
So, Dr. Dempsey, if I could ask a follow-up to your response?
Yes.
So would it be preferable to pull completion of an EPP out and make it kind of a separate? My understanding of what you're saying is it's a requirement to complete an ed prep program. And then in addition to that requirement, are these ways to determine that you met the effectiveness as a result of that participation? The way it's constructed here leads one to believe that these are 6 equivalent pathways that anyone has the choice to do to the exclusion of the other 5. And that's what I'm arguing. I don't think that's what this working group is saying, unless I have it wrong.
I'm glad that you said it that way. I think I understand a little bit better now what you're getting at. So you're saying pull 5 out and possibly leave the other 5 there and make this maybe another bullet point or another letter as a standalone.
Right. I'm suggesting it is this thing, completion of an EPP, and a menu of options to demonstrate the effectiveness as a result of completing that EPP is where that sounds to me more like what we're trying to say, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think the way it reads now, we have 6 equivalent paths to becoming a teacher, one of which could be enrolling in an EPP, and I don't think that's what we're trying to say.
I agree with your last statement. I do not believe that was at all what the working group hoped to come out of that.
Yeah. And Mr. Blanton, the co-chairs can make that, in the process we've been using, can make that change if based on this conversation you think that's warranted. I would also say, just as a sort of as a way of reading these are I think the state board has the word recommendation at the top. These are not prescriptive, they are recommendations. And then the work that will come in the future may include those kinds of modifications after this point, but we can certainly make that modification at this point if the co-chairs so choose.
And I'm assuming that we need to do that today, since this is going for a vote, which mean that Dr. Penfield is not here. I am happy to suggest that as a modification, so that maybe the intent is a little clearer.
Yes. And you can include it as a statement in the addendum before it goes forward to should it go forward to the state board.
And Kim, it looks like you're working on that now, so thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, clarifying questions or comments?
Hey, this is Ann. I had my hand raised. I just want to state that was always something that came out of the first phase of this model, was that this would be pulled out and EPP enrollment would be a requirement. So I don't think we're doing anything that's not part of what was originally put forth.
Thank you, Dr. Bullock.
Chair Dempsey, this is Hank. Can we ask other groups a question at this point, or are we still on this one?
No, we can any questions at this point to help to clarify the summary.
Okay. And I don't know exactly who this goes to because it's not really included. It might be something different, but new pathway entry points seem like the most logical place. So one of the things that I think we've talked about over the last almost 2 years was the idea that our student teachers could come in at the apprentice level and actually get paid as an intern. Is there a place within these recommendations to the board that we try that as part of this pilot process, if for no other reason to see, what that does for teacher recruitment into these EPP programs and into the districts for which those EPPs sit?
So I'll take a stab at that. We did talk about it briefly, very briefly, that student teachers or even your teacher assistants who maybe become a teacher in a classroom under the apprentice license, because that's where the associate's degree or 60 hours towards completion of a program would fall. And that would allow them to do, to serve as the apprentice teacher as a co-teacher in a co-teaching model with one of the advanced teacher roles. And they would be paid according to whatever salary schedule is approved. It'll be interesting to see how that might work in a pilot program. I'm very interested in how that would work in a pilot, but that's where I believe we and one of the original subcommittee groups as well working in this area envision that.
Okay, thank you. I know we were real direct in saying that master's pay should be a consideration here. I didn't know if we needed to be more direct in our opinion that these internships should be paid as well before it goes to the state board for their consideration.
Hank, I think it's in the compensation document, which is of course parallel to this, and the as the pilot districts are identified, we can if the co-chairs agree, that could be included in the addendum as a bullet just to make it explicit.
I'm fine. Yeah, I'm fine with that being added. I would say this as well, though. There may be some candidates who don't want to start their licensure pathway in the apprentice or license 1 or license 2. They may, if they complete their ed prep program, may want to do more of a traditional student teaching experience and come in at a license 3. So I didn't feel like we needed to be that explicit, but I think it certainly could be something added to the addendum that student teaching options could be included in the apprentice licensure process. Apprentice licensure process. My apologies.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. Any other questions? If there are no questions at this point, and thank you again for the work that has gone into this and the discussion that we just had, in order to be responsible to our charged by the State Board of request by the State Board of Education, we would need to consider a motion that does basically 3 things: forwards the current reports, the briefs and the addenda, to the State Board of Education, recommends that the State Board of Education use this in communication and work that they and the state superintendent will do with the General Assembly, and then to continue to communicate back to Pepsi as outlined in statute for the continued and further development of the of this framing and the development of the pilots. So at this point, I will entertain a motion on the work we've just reviewed.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the NC Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission also known as PEP-C. 1-4 to the State Board of Education, the current report on professional pathways and licensure framework recommendation briefs and supplemental language related to policy, rules, and statutes that the board and North Carolina General Assembly would need to adopt, amend, or repeal. 2, recommend that the board use this report to initiate piloting a program to study a new professional pathways and licensure system to replace the current system, including areas communicated by the board to PEP-C from the Blueprint for Action. Advanced teaching and teaching roles, Blueprint item number 3. Measures of teaching effectiveness, formerly student impact measures, Blueprint item number 5. New pathway entry points, Blueprint item number 8, and new professional learning tools and structures for beginning and experienced teachers, Blueprint item number 7. And number 3, communicate to the state board PEP-C's commitment to continue to work with the board as noted in statutory requirements and as appropriate in the further development of recommendations and operationalization of the pilots.
Thank you, Dr. Fleming. Dr. Bullock, your hand is up. Do you have a question or is that a holdover?
That is a holdover.
All right, thank you. We have a motion before the commission. Is there a second?
Mr. Chair, this is Catherine. Could I ask that Dr. Fleming read number 2 again, please?
Yes.
Number 2 would be to recommend that the board use this report to initiate piloting a program to study a new professional pathways and licensure system to replace the current system, including areas communicated by the board to PEP-C from the Blueprint for Action. Those include advanced teaching and leader roles, Blueprint item number 3, measures of teaching effectiveness, which is formerly the student impact measures point, Blueprint item number 5, new pathway entry points, Blueprint item number 8, and new professional learning tools and structures for beginning and experienced teachers, Blueprint item number 7.
Thank you. Can follow up?
Yes.
The language was that the board initiate, Dr. Fleming?
Yeah, that they use this report to initiate piloting a program to study a new professional pathways and licensure system to replace the current system.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And Dr. Truitt, that initiation is basically also in point 1 of the motion, which is the initiation of the engagement with the General Assembly around the pilot development.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
Chair Dempsey, this is Scott.
Yes, sir.
Seems like a fairly prepared motion. Is it possible for us to view this in some way? I kind of got lost in Dr. Fleming's list compared to your statement that we forward all documents. This was Dr. Fleming just reiterating all the documents or only some of the documents?
Well, we can
all 4.
Yeah, all 4, and the brief and the addendum, whatever the current version of that is for each of the 4. Kim, I don't know if you can pull that up. This is a draft that I wrote on the basis of my understanding of the statutory process that will play out as a basis of the motion. So Kim, can you show that? Because I shared the draft.
I am grabbing it really quickly.
All right.
Thank you for that. I'm not questioning, Aaron, the motion. It was a little more detailed than I was expecting.
It is. And I agree with Dr. Elliott. It's with the different bullet points under each item too, it can sound very mumbled, jumbled, or whatever it may be.
Yes, and I appreciate the question. And actually, the way I phrased it before I requested the motion was much briefer than what's in the actual document. So this is the actual framing of the language that would need to be in the motion for us to meet the request from the state board if we choose to adopt the motion.
Thank you, Dr.
Mr. Chairman, in all fairness in that too, I think probably all of us, could have done this motion with less words, but I do know we wanted to make sure that was specific, and I believe maybe even if Allison was consulted on this, we wanted to make sure we covered all our bases there.
Yes, sir. And I'm giving people a minute to read this. Do we have any additional questions or discussion on the motion? And Dr. Evans, I'm not sure that we got a second yet.
Dr. Dempsey, this is Scott. I'll second the motion.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion or questions?
I'd like to be reminded, this is Ann, what the new pathway entry points are, because this has specific, if we could.
I'm going to try to pull up my hard copy. If the co-chair of that group could walk through.
Thanks, Kim.
There you go. And is that the text you're asking about?
It says number 8.
Oh, number 8 is a reference to the blueprint.
The blueprint, yeah.
Yeah, it's not a reference to this document. So, Ann, you're asking why the reference to number 8 is in the motion?
I'm asking for someone to just re-summarize what that is. I like your one sentences, Van. If you could re-summarize it, what is the pathway that is being recommended?
The recommendation, the brief from this group includes those entry points that are listed on the point number 1.
So it's the levels.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Dr. Dempsey, are we having discussion on the motion?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. This is Scott. I appreciate your preparation of the motion. And I would just want to reiterate, and again, I'm bringing forward perspectives from other superintendents, that my vote in support of this is conditional to that third point. I don't yet think that we have the details necessary for a successful implementation of a pilot, but I think I understand that this is an important step in moving forward to it. And I'm grateful for the opportunity for us to pilot. And I do hope that the state board and the legislature will continue to engage with Pepsi on the development of the pilot so that we can help to guide those decisions and ensure that it's the most successful implementation, even in the pilot phase, possible.
Yes, absolutely.
And Mr. Chairman, to follow up with Dr. Elliott's comments here, and I agree with him. I just think there's so many, before we can get into the weeds of what these pilots would look like, there's so many statutory and possibly state board policies, and I don't want to say so many, but certainly many maybe, or a few policies that need to be changed before we're even able to get that far into the weeds.
Yes, thank you both. And one of the unknowns at this point in terms of further development of the detail in this where Pepsi will be involved is the location of the pilots, which districts and what the on the ground context will be in those locations in terms of what the operational components become. And I absolutely, to your point, will make that clear in terms of Pepsi's role and responsibility and obligation to the state board. I also will say the communication and the work up to this motion with the state board chair and the state superintendent has been open and intentional and clear. So I anticipate that will continue. People understand Pepsi's role in this.
I greatly appreciate that, and both of them as well. I would just say, and then I'll end on this, that some districts will need to see further details of implementation of the pilot before deciding to volunteer in.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, may I say something?
Please.
Yeah, to piggyback on Drs. Fleming and Elliott, this cannot happen if it's not funded. And so in order for the pilots to proceed, there must be an appropriation that will allow just participating districts to pay teachers who are at the various stages of licensure as we are recommending to the state board. We don't know what's going to end up in legislation ultimately, but we do know that in order for us to move forward with pilots, it has to be funded. And so superintendents should rest assured that the Department of Public Instruction and the State Board of Education will advocate at the highest levels to the General Assembly that these pilots be funded appropriately.
We have a motion on the floor, and that motion has been seconded. And Dr. Evans, I believe we have maintained a quorum.
We have.
At this point, I would like to move to a vote. I will first do it as a voice vote. If there are votes on both sides, we will go to a roll call vote. So we have a motion on the floor. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Make sure everyone unmuted and had a chance to vote. Dr. Evans, I heard no nay votes. What is the number of aye votes?
That would be 12, I believe.
Well, thank you very much. Given that the motion passes, I do appreciate the work and the energy and the focus that the work groups and the co-chairs have brought to this, given the relationship that we have with the State Board of Education and its chair and the Department of Public Instruction and the state superintendent. It is important to recognize Pepsi's agility in being able to be responsible to the requests that have been made to us and do it in a way that is in the best interest of children, public education, and educators in the state of North Carolina. So I do appreciate the work that people have put into this since the December meeting when this step in the process began. So thank you all very much. If there's no other business, thank you, commission members, advisors, and staff for your preparation for the discussions. I remind commission members that our next monthly meeting will be held virtually on Thursday, March the 9th from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Please note the change in date for the next monthly meeting. This is due to the work group, to the working group work happening prior to that meeting. We have now completed our meeting, and unless there is additional business at this time, I ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved. This is Catherine.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart. Second.
Second, this is Madison.
Thank you very much. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you all, and we are adjourned.